Busted making chocolate.
What's happening over here?
You're lucky it's not all around my face.
What's up, everybody? Today at Speedy's Garage, we're going to be pinning the crank on a Hellcat, can't say that, on a Hellcat Challenger. Stick around, I'm going to show you how it's done. It's a little more complicated than you might think, but we're going to do it without taking half the car apart. We're back at Freeland Dodge to pick up our crank bolt. There's an upgraded part that's been released, so we're going to pick that up. And I like to come to Freeland Dodge and see Jack. You've seen me mention him before, so I either go here or eastcoastmoparts.com, give Andy some business over there. So those are about the only two places I get my Dodge parts from. So let's go inside and see what Jack's doing today. Walk through the shop today because the weather's bad. What's up?
How you doing? Hey.
Yeah, my buddy's on film. I also picked up some green Permatex thread locker. It's designed for pins and things of that nature. Some people use it, some people don't. I'm going to use it because I'm a belt and suspenders kind of guy. This is the crank pin kit I ordered from HHP. In the box was the jig, and so you're going to remove the factory crank bolt, and then you're going to bolt this in place. It includes the bolt to do so. One pin is taped to the jig. I ordered a spare just in case I decided to do two. I did a bunch of research and everything I found said that one is sufficient, so that's all I'm going to do. I don't feel like drilling a second hole. And then it comes with a pretty nice drill bit. It feels very sharp. Hopefully it does well. So that's what we're going to use. That's what comes in the HHP crank pin kit, as well as a little paperwork. It looks like this was originally a Pro Charger part. They must have been happy with it and decided to use it. So it gives you some information and some tech tips. It's one sheet, front and back. So in preparation of doing this work, I ordered a crank bolt. It's a new part number as of not too long ago. The part number is 065123358A. I'll put that down here at the bottom. I'll show you the package a little closer too. Hopefully you can see that. That's the new crank bolt. It doesn't really look like anything special. It's just a big black bolt, that's it. A lot of people think there's a diamond encrusted washer that's on these. It's not actually on the crank bolt, it's on another part of the assembly as part of that crank pulley, is what I'm trying to say. And so this one isn't the diamond encrusted washer. This is just a bolt and a washer, but it's very specific. So in 2018, they have changed the part number, and now they've changed the torque spec as well. The 2016, 2015, 2017 Hellcats, it was 239 foot-pounds, which is a lot of torque on the crank bolt. As of 2018, they've updated it. The Demon, the Redeye, and the Hellcat all have the same torque spec now, and it's 148 foot-pounds, so you get your torque wrench on it, get it to click at 148. Once that occurs, you turn the bolt another 150 degrees. So they're looking for that bolt stretch to get in there and provide the proper clamping force on the crank pulley so that it's good to go. I wasn't sure how I was going to accomplish that, and so when I ordered the crank bolt from my local dealer, the one that I built the relationship with, there's a technician there named Keith, who's one of their master techs. He's the technician that actually swapped out the supercharger on Go Man Go when it had the bearing problem. And when I saw the work that he did, I went back and talked to him while I was kind of working on the car. He was very specific and deliberate about the work that he does on a car, and so I value his opinion. I went in there to talk to him when I ordered the crank bolt, or when I picked up the crank bolt, I should say, and here's what he had to say. All right, we're here with Keith. He's the master technician down here at Freeland Dodge. He's the guy that swapped out the supercharger on our Hellcat a while back when we had problems. I came down to ask him, we're gonna put this crank bolt in today, and it's got a special setting. It's the new ones are 200 Newton meters torque, but then you have to tighten it another 150 degrees. So I was kind of asking him, how would you handle that? He's got a pretty nice snap-on torque wrench. It'll actually show us, Keith. It'll actually do the degrees for you. So there's your 150 degrees. I don't know if you can see that. This is 500 bucks, and I don't have one of these. So he showed me this other tool that he's been nice enough to let me borrow, where you can actually put your socket on here, and this will be over the top of your bolt, and you can set it to 0, and then as you tighten it, it'll move this around and get you to where you need to be. So we're going to try to go with this, try to make that work. Keith, thank you, buddy. No problem. So there you go. We picked up our crank bolt. They're about 30 bucks, but well worth it. They're one-time use. They're torque to yield. So if you're doing this job, make sure you get a new one. And Keith was nice enough to actually go into the Chrysler Dodge, whatever you call it, system, and print out some information for me. that included some installation information as well as torque specs. And I was going to show you guys that if I can find it on here. It says 200 Newton meters plus 150 degrees, which is 148 foot-pounds plus 150 degrees. And it says do not reuse these fasteners. So there you go. Straight from Mopar, swap that fastener out. We also have the little degree wheel that Keith let us borrow. And he also said I might need one of these. So this is a special service tool. It is made, he thinks this is the right one, that goes in the dampener or the crank pulley, and it kind of holds it in place. And it's got provisions for either a 3/4 or 1/2 inch ratchet. You can see that there, probably gonna be a breaker bar with that much torque. And this is designed to hold the pulley still while you tighten the bolt. So we've got this as an option. The other option is we may have to put something in the flywheel. We have to remove the inspection plate and wedge something in the flywheel where the engine won't turn over. With that much torque, when you start cranking the bolt down or even loosening it, there's an opportunity there for the engine to just start turning over, and you'll just start turning the engine over with that crank. So we're gonna hopefully not have to use that, or I'm sorry, we're hopefully not gonna have to pull the inspection plate off and wedge a piece of wood or something in the flywheel. We've got this that we can try to use, but I'm gonna be doing this by myself, so we'll just kind of have to see how it goes. But thanks, Keith, for hooking me up with a couple of tools. The other tools you're gonna need that might be a little bit unique, you're gonna need a right angle drill. I picked this one up from Harbor Freight, pretty reasonably priced, and I had a coupon too, so I think about maybe about $30 in this. You're gonna need a good air compressor to run it though, because going through that crank, it's hardened steel, so you're gonna need a little bit of an air compressor to go behind it. It needs 4 CFM at 90 PSI is what the box says. I usually set mine to about 100 so that the tool gets plenty of air considering all the lines and everything. You're gonna need a 21 millimeter socket. That's for the crank bolt. Make sure it's an impact type. With all that torque on there, you don't want to take a chance of shattering the socket. You're gonna need a torque wrench that will go to 148 foot-pounds, and more than likely, at least 1 breaker bar, maybe 2. So I've got a nice 25-inch, 1/2 inch drive breaker bar there that we're gonna use to try to get this done. But just in case my little 150 foot-pound torque wrench can't get the job done, our buddy Chad, who has the very fast OST Dyno Tune 6-speed Challenger, he just ran a 1016, a 10.16 a couple weekends ago. He let us borrow this 3/4 drive torque wrench, and it's a monster, as you can see, as well as Bertha here, which is going to give us a little bit of leverage if we need it. So I got a couple of backup tools to get this job done, just in case what I have on hand won't do it. All right, so I'm going to try to illustrate why it is that we want to pin the crank. So if you've got your engine, I'm going to try to draw this. Let's see. This is the supercharger on a Hellcat here. You've got your crank pulley here, and you got what they call your accessories. So you've got, let's call it your air conditioning, your power steering. Some of them are now electric. Mine is still belt driven. You got your water pump, and you've got a belt that connects all of these to the crank. Okay, and on mine with the Hellcat, you've got a supercharger up here. So you've got a supercharger pulley that also has a belt that comes down. So all that stress is on this, they call it a dampener, but it's basically a crank pulley, and it kind of balances the engine. Now, what you've got is just a bolt that's a very high torque bolt holding that in place. I'm gonna go in a little bit closer so you guys can see this better. So just that bolt holds everything still. Well, in a normal aspirated application, one without a supercharger, this is usually okay. This spins, the crank, of course, has the pistons on it. They're inside the engine, but the crank is what turns everything over inside the motor. When you have a forced induction application with a supercharger, you've got a lot of extra stress on here, and on the Hellcat, it takes about 100 horsepower to turn that supercharger. And so you can imagine when you're on the gas wide open, getting on it real hard, and then you chop the throttle or shut the throttle, all that inertia for that supercharger spinning has to slow down, and it puts stress on this crank bolt. And so what it'll try to do is it'll start giving resistance the opposite direction. So the crank's trying to turn this way, clockwise rather, and it's trying to put counterclockwise force against it. And what that can do is cause this bolt to loosen. When that loosens, now your dampener can actually spin on the crank, and if it damages the crank, engine's got to come out and get replaced. Once the crank is damaged, it's basically the heart of the engine. Whole thing has to come apart to fix that. So what this does is you drill a hole and a pin goes in, a steel hardened pin, and it basically puts a piece of material between the crank bolt and the crank pulley. So now they're locked together. That pin goes between both, kind of like that, and now it can't spin. It is locked together. Your bolt, your crank bolt goes back on top of that, holding it in place, and now you're good to go. I've got the car elevated on the race ramps. I'm gonna try to take the radiator fan out the bottom. You can see the top is pretty tight. So I'm hoping I can get the radiator fan out through the bottom of the car. That means we're gonna have to remove the splash shields and whatnot. And hopefully that's all we have to remove. Just get that fan out of the way, and that'll give us enough clearance with that 90-degree drill to get the job done. And it's a nasty rainy day today, so it's a perfect day to be in the shop. That's enough yakety yak. Let's get busy taking this thing apart. I'm gonna start by removing the splash shields underneath so I can try to look and see how to get these fans out, or the fan shroud. We got a couple of 10mm bolts, and then a whole bunch of little 7mm bolts. I'm gonna use a impact driver for those. There's also quite a few push pins. They had to design this thing to hold up to 200 miles an hour, so they attached it pretty well. Use a variety of tools. I've got a little clip remover tool I'm using, as well as this one to get these out. These are a little bit recessed, a little trickier to get. And if half of it comes out, don't worry, you can get the other half later. Okay, the electrical plug for the fan is pretty beefy. So what I ended up doing is I ended up removing this side panel here on the top of the engine bay, and I also took out this little tray that covers the ABS. Make sure you release the positive power cable, and then it'll let you pull it forward and then out. So that's how that came out. And that allowed me to get access to the power plug. I'm gonna show that to you. It's got a lock on it, that red lock. You slide that up, and then you pinch back here behind it, and that'll let you pull it out. And I came in through the lines of the ABS, and then it was just two little 10mm bolts. I used a stubby wrench on those, very easy, lefty-loosey. And now, as you can see, the fan assembly is actually loose. Now I just gotta make room for it to come out the bottom of the car. Okay, so the fan is literally just held in with those top two 10mm bolts, and then it sets in some rubber feet on the bottom. However, the supercharger coolant line was in the way, even though I removed the push pins. So I had to drain that. I was trying to avoid any fluid management, but now we had to do that because that line's gonna have to actually come out of the way. I did take a bit of a bath in the coolant, so when you pop that hose off, mine was real sticky. It was like stuck on the metal line. When I popped the rubber hose off, it sprayed me pretty good with coolant. So be aware of that and avoid the same mistake I made. And don't tell Mrs. Speedy I used one of her bowls as a container for the coolant. Okay. We got it. All right. Okay, so we got a fresh shirt so we don't smell like coolant. We got the fan out. Now let's see what we're working with as far as access to that crank bolt. And what it took to finally get it out, there's two 13mm bolts on each side of the radiator. There's two there, and there's two behind this plastic shroud. I'll try to get it where you can see it up there. And I just used a long extension, and I didn't take them all the way out, but I loosened them enough so that the radiator had some play, and I could use that to get the fan out. It did want to catch on the, I believe that's the water pump pulley up there, and so I had to come from the top and ease it around that pulley, and then it just came out pretty easy. I did have to remove the little 10mm bolt that held this line in place so that could move back, but once you have clearance between here and here, it'll just come right out the bottom like you saw. And to prevent any coolant drips, I just used a piece of a nitrile glove and a rubber band over the end of the coolant line there so that nothing else drips out. As you can see, I placed a piece of cardboard over the radiator. I don't want to take any chances of damaging any of the fins. Now we're going to see if our drill will fit in here, because that's going to be the biggest tool we got to use. Barely, but that will work. We're good to go. Okay, next we're going to try to get that stock crank bolt out, or we are going to get that crank bolt out. It's either going to be really easy or it's going to be pretty tight. They're supposed to be torqued from the factory to 239 foot-pounds. One of the reasons I'm pinning this crank is because there was an issue where some of the bolts either weren't torqued properly or they're just plain coming loose, and the pulley spun on the crankshaft like I talked about earlier and damaged the engine, and those owners of those Hellcats had to get new engines put in. Now a lot of people say, well, it's under warranty. Well, sure, but do you really want to have the engine swapped out in your car, take it to a dealership and hope that they have a technician that's familiar with doing that actually do the work properly? Because that's pretty involved, number one. And number two, do you want to wait the weeks and weeks it could take for them to get an engine? So I don't really want to do that. I know I can prevent my problem by pinning the crank and we'll be done. The second thing is, I actually know someone personally who had the issue. Their crank bolt backed out, the dampener or the crank pulley spun on the crank and damaged the crank snout, and they had to get a new engine put in, and he happened to be one of the technicians at a Dodge dealer, believe it or not. So happened to him, so we're gonna make sure it doesn't happen to us. Wish me luck getting this bolt out. So I did a little test of my crank bolt, and it is definitely tight, so I had to set up a little rig here. I'm gonna show you what I did. Hopefully you can see down there, I did end up using the special service tool that Keith let me borrow. Otherwise I would have had to put or wedge something in the inspection cover of the transmission to lock it, but since I had this tool, I'm going to use it. It's got provisions for a 1/2 inch or 3/4 breaker bar, so I've got a 1/2 inch breaker bar wedged against the thermostat housing here. Underneath, I'm using Chad's 3/4 inch breaker bar. It's reversible, so it will tighten as well as loosen. And I've got it on a 21mm socket on the crank bolt, and I'm literally gonna have to use my foot to push on it. That's how tight that bolt is, so let's see if we can get it loosened up. Yeah, that's tight. Wow. There we go. All right, we almost got it. There it is. Success. With the factory crank bolt out, I wanted to show you what it looked like compared to the new part number. And this part number replaces this bolt in the Redeye, the Hellcat, and the Demon. So it's quite a bit different actually. Here's the factory one. You'll notice it's got a collar at the top that's smooth, and then it's got a little threaded section, and then another smooth section, and then another threaded section. That's what it looks like. And then the new one just has a smooth collar at the top, and the whole rest of the bolt is threaded. So that explains the new torque spec. This one, original 239 foot-pounds, a set amount. This one, 148 foot-pounds plus 150 degrees, because what they're doing is they're relying on the stretch of those threads to provide the clamping force. So again, another reason I'm pinning that crank, if they've had to redesign this, they obviously found a problem. You know, engineers, they do things and there's bean counters and all that kind of stuff, and then they learn over time as these cars are out in the field. I'm going to use this new bolt to help, but I'm also pinning the crank to make sure I definitely don't have any problem. And I just saw one more difference. There's a relief in the bottom of the new bolt, assumingly to let that stretch happen like it's designed to. You'll notice the original bolt, hopefully you can see that, does not have that relief. So that's enough for today. I'm gonna stop there. We'll continue this next week, so be sure to hit subscribe if you haven't already. Give it a nice thumbs up if you enjoyed this content. Be sure to check us out on Instagram. It's @Speedies_garage, as well as our website, www.speediesgarage.net. Hopefully I'll see you out there, and be sure to tune in next week and you'll see us finish up that crank pinning job.